So now, Chris, I'll ask you to please take it away.
Okay, yeah, because, all right. Hello, can everybody see me? Hi, good morning, everyone. Just wanted to welcome you to our first CID event of the year. I'm glad that all of you are here to find wonderful and fantastic information to help us understand the market in terms of commercial real estate. Without further ado, I would like to actually hand over our meeting to John Barrett, who will be our moderator. John Barrett is the managing director for RM Friedland and has been in real estate for over 25 years. John Barrett.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Crystal. I'd like to welcome our panel here today, who I will introduce in a few minutes. Today's meeting does have a sponsor. It is Webster Bank, and here representing Webster Bank is Jim Lanfranchi, who would like to say a few words this morning.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first meeting of 2021. A lot of new beginnings. My son is starting his career in Washington, D.C. in commercial real estate this week as well. And I said, wow, there's a lot of new things going on, a lot of new beginnings. And he said, yeah, Daddy, it's the election, though, is a lot of out with the old and in with the even older. So he's 28, so he has a different skew of things. But Webster Bank is very proud to be a sponsor, and we hope to continue that going into the future. Webster Bank, especially in New York, and New Jersey, and Fairfield County, is coming off one of the best years we've ever had in terms of commercial loan production. So we welcome the opportunity to speak to all of you individually at some point in the future. And also, again, very happy to be a sponsor, very happy to be a participant in HGAR's CID division. Thank you very much, John. Thank you all for letting us participate.
Thanks, Jim. So I'd like to introduce our panelists first today and thank them again for spending their morning with us. In alphabetical order, we have first Paul Adler, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Rand Commercial. Paul is an attorney, veteran commercial real estate broker, and creative development professional who has an outstanding reputation as an industry leader throughout New York, New Jersey, and New York City. He's been doing this for over 3 decades. Bill Cuddy, Executive VP at CBRE. Bill is a trusted commercial real estate professional who serves the needs of his clients on a regional, national, and international basis. As Executive Vice President working from CBRE's Westchester Fairfield office, he provides consulting and brokerage services to corporations, landlords, and institutions. Next, we have Sarah Jones-Matoro, President of RM Friedland. Sarah has been president of RM Friedland since November of 2015. Prior to that, she was an office leasing broker for CBRE in the New Jersey suburban market. RM Friedland is a commercial real estate brokerage company and has been and continues to be the market leader in investment sales, industrial, and retail brokerage in Westchester and the Bronx. Next, we have Tom LaPerche, Director of the Commercial Group at Houlihan Lawrence Commercial. Tom combines more than 30 years of successful real estate experience with considerable expertise in marketing and government land planning. He has decades of commercial and residential knowledge rooted in Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess counties. Next, we have Patricia Valente, Executive Managing Director at Newmark Knight Frank. Patricia specializes in securing space for many of the region's major financial service organizations, including JP Morgan, Chase, MAK Capital Partners, Resource Mortgage Banking, Landau, as well as many others. Next, we have Kathy Zamachansky, President and broker of KZA Realty Group. Kathy Zamachansky is the owner and president of KZA Realty Group, a Bronx-based commercial real estate brokerage and development consulting firm. Kathy is involved in local, political, and economic development groups in the Bronx and has helped spearhead the commercial revitalization of the Bronx. Thank you all again for your participation in today's panel. For our audience members, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you move down to the lower center of your screen, you'll see it. It will pop up Q&A. You can type in questions at any time. For our panelists, feel free, if I don't direct a question at you, feel free to comment on someone's answer or add to it at any point. And again, thank you for participating in our panel today. Last year when we met, the national economy was booming. Stock market was soaring. Unemployment was at record lows. Interest rates had just moved off of their historic lows, and sentiment in the business community thought that the president would certainly win re-election. We had figured out how to deal with Con Ed's national gas moratorium, and we're trying to understand the impact of the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. The local real estate market was vibrant, and we were still playing in that extra inning game that nobody knew when it would end. Only a few were paying attention to a virus that had just been found in a Washington state nursing home at the time. As you all know, we were shut down the second week of March and have been gradually reopening, closing, and reopening since then. Some businesses were changed forever, and others that were slowly changing saw an acceleration of that change. Experts predict that 70% of independent restaurants may never open again. Hotels in some markets have shut down permanently. Smaller fitness centers may never reopen or may never recover as people purchased high-end physical fitness equipment for their own homes. Some sectors did well. Home delivery of everything from groceries to dinner and cocktails became the norm for some, as well as your daily deliveries from Amazon. Although the economy, including the local real estate market, virtually shut down for the second quarter, the economy has rebounded somewhat and things are looking brighter. We have a new president, and most indexes of the stock market hit all-time record highs yesterday, as interest rates are at or near historic lows, and it looks like there will be a large stimulus bill coming from the new administration. So let's for a moment examine what happened last year and talk about the expectations going into the year versus what really happened. Volume was certainly down, number of transactions was down, pricing was down in some markets. So on a macro level for the region, if anybody would like to comment on what they saw last year.
John, it's Paul Adler. I think that from our perch, taking a look at Orange, Rockland, Westchester, Bronx, and even some of the other outside regions, it was really a story of sectors, how each sector was doing, and you could not look at the real estate market in general. You had to look at it in sectors. And I think you also had to look at it in terms of geography. It was a real geopolitical move of real estate out of New York City. As we all know, commercial follows residential, and that's a very good sign for 2021, given that almost every residential company in the region had their best year ever, and commercial follows the talent. And it was very interesting. Orange County, I think Tom LaPerch would agree, was hot to the touch as it relates to industrial and flex space. Rockland held its own. It had a big boom in resi, has a limited inventory. And then Westchester was a story completely of sectors. Again, also the best performing residential real estate market in the history for Westchester. And we saw a lot of, because Westchester is so diverse and so dense in terms of the kinds of commercial that it has, we saw a very different story based on very different sectors. If you were in hospitality and restaurants, it was one terrible story. If you were in office, it was a mixed bag story. And if you had any kind of warehouse space, and I'm sure Sarah would agree, any kind of warehouse or flex space in Bronx or Westchester, it was doing real well. So it was really a story of where you were and what sector you were in.
Yeah, I think I'd like to, since Paul did a good job talking from a macro perspective, from a micro perspective, I think just looking at the difference in activity quarter over quarter is really interesting because, you know, people kind of categorize 2020 as 2020 in its entirety. But as, you know, and I'd be curious to hear what everyone else experienced, but from our perspective, across every asset type, the second quarter was where the difference was. First quarter, we came out actually ahead of where we were in 2019. Third quarter, we came out ahead. We had our busiest August we've had since I've been here. Fourth quarter, we were a little bit behind, but mostly flat. Second quarter, we were at 8% of our revenue for 2000 in comparison to 2019. So, I mean, you know, when we were on lockdown, it was like everybody was completely frozen, even industrial. I mean, we were getting on calls with our industrial clients and we were like, listen, we know everyone's saying industrial's hot, but no one's doing anything right now. Everyone's frozen, you know, for that period of 12 weeks. Did people experience much the same, you know, in the second quarter?
Sarah, it's Kathy. To be honest with you, when we got the lockdown, and I was obviously working from my house, and I'm a small boutique firm, so I don't have that many brokers. So I talk to a lot of brokers outside that I work with, like David Simone. I was getting all the calls were going to my phone. And I have my cell phone. I have to tell you, we were getting a lot of activity. It was during that time, if you remember, that Steve and Mia and I, who work on La Centrale, we actually got the restaurant, the Mexican restaurant, during that period. I mean, we locked it in, that restaurant and a pizza place, and we had a tremendous amount of phone calls about some other spaces on Tremont Avenue. Now, my experience was I'm a boots on the ground broker. I'm not a statistician. I don't do the fancy stuff. I'm in the street, walking the buildings, walking the areas. Obviously, New York City is affected much differently than Westchester. We have a mayor who doesn't understand business, a governor who doesn't seem to understand the city, and the lockdown of the restaurants was probably the worst thing that they could have done because that paralyzed the nail salons, the hair salons, all of those. When they reopened, we lost a lot of those smaller restaurants, nail salons, hair salons. Now they seem to be very strong, not where they were, nowhere near where they were, but some of them are expanding, to be perfectly honest. And we're seeing a lot of interest in the smaller users, which I'll talk about later. The large spaces, we are not able to do. I'm recommending that we divide them all because we don't have large users. As you know, we're working on models, and that's a really big problem right now. We need to divide it. So I think that we had some activity here, but it's, I'll explain later. We're affected a lot by what goes on in government. And there's a lot of things going on in the city council that are very adversely impacting the real estate industry in New York City.
John, I'll jump in here if you don't mind. First of all, thank you for the invite. Pretty impressive group here. Thank you for the invite. Sarah, I can concur 100% with the cycle that you went through. We were busy in the first quarter, second quarter, we were scrambling, and third and fourth, actually I had my best fourth quarter ever this past year. But actually the second quarter, Sarah, I was on the phone mostly trying to negotiate some rent relief for all our residential offices. And I spent most of the time just doing that and trying to just see if we're in survival mode. We didn't know where we were going at that point. So the second quarter was actually good for me because I got re-engaged with most of the landlords in the regions, and I kind of heard all the stories were going on now. But the fourth quarter was great. And listen, this is my third crash. I've been in the business so long, and I think it's a great time to be a broker. I think, you know, by the end of this year, we're going to be humming in a good way. So, but I concur from the cycle that we went through, but we're ready for this new cycle. And like I say, it was a good time, second quarter, to engage with the landlords to kind of get their perspective of what was going on. And now we're repaying most of the rent that we've asked relief on. So I think things could be stabilized moving forward in a good way.
Patty, you want to give us your opinion?
Sure. You know, not so different from anyone else. I remember being in the office on that Friday, and we received a call from our New York office that said, pack up everyone out of the office in 20 minutes. So I turned to my assistant and I said, we probably won't be in next week, Sheila, but we'll definitely be in the week after that. Well, we're still home, and it's amazing what's gone on. In some ways, I think we're working more efficiently. I think we're working harder, and I think we're working smarter. Like everyone else said, everyone was paralyzed. No one knew where the next day was going to bring us. Companies were just trying to figure out how to pay the rent. And I think we've come a long way since then. The groups that we work with who were in the middle of transactions, the ones who were long-term players, they're going to be there for 10 years. They're going to be there for 8 years. So decisions still have to be made. They're not closing offices. There was definitely some of a pause, and we've seen a huge amount of business coming out of New York. It's no secret. Most of the groups have individuals who live in Westchester and Fairfield, and they don't want to go in. So requirements that were 2 years, some of them turned out to be 10-year requirements, 7-year requirements. And the third quarter really has ramped up. Listen, there's no secret. The vaccine's a game changer. We're seeing that we had a tremendous fourth quarter, and people are feeling more confident, and more companies are coming to work. I think the CEOs need to take another look at how they reposition their offices. People need to collaborate. Younger folks need mentoring. And the longer we stay out of the office, the longer we're going to be, unattached to our business. There's something to be said about going to the business every day, right? And you feel like connected. When you're home, you could stray a little bit. So hopefully in the new year, we'll see more and more return to the workforce.
Bill, would you like to close it out?
Sure, John, thank you. I think we're all grateful to have 2020 in the rearview mirror. On the macro side, in a business that we're all in, that's so driven by supply and demand. In Westchester, we had 2 long anticipated vacancies come online. We have 250,000 square feet at the Gateway building in downtown White Plains at the White Plains train station, with the relocation of Alliance Bernstein to Nashville, Tennessee. Just to put that in order of magnitude, 250,000 square feet means that we're looking for 1,000 jobs. The other, again, anticipated vacancy was PepsiCo relocating back to their headquarters location on Anderson Hill Road in Harrison. They vacated the West Park building on Westchester Avenue, about 350,000 square feet. Again, the challenge there is to find close to 1,500 jobs. So we do have this overhang and negative net absorption for 2020 of 1.3 million square feet of space. And that does present a challenge for us.
John, I wanted to just say one thing, and now that Bill Cuddy is rounded out the first question. As many of you know and have been following this roundtable for a really long time, this has been a real staple of HGAR, and John, you do a wonderful job. But each year, John asks for predictions, and last year there was a bet. Sarah witnessed it, but there was a bet with Bill Cuddy that if he was wrong in any of his predictions for 2020, he would don a bow tie. Clearly, he's not wearing the bow tie, and
But he did lose.
But Sarah, you don't remember, but he did predict the thing. He said there was going to be some kind of pandemic. He said to buy stock in Pfizer. He said, don't buy tickets.
Did he? I don't remember that.
He said, don't buy tickets to the 2020 Olympics.
Or the inauguration.
He was concerned about Harvey Weinstein. So that's why he's not wearing the bow tie.
There you go.
Yeah. So
I don't recall any of that. You know what I will say though, honestly, John, is I think this is, I guess, my 3rd year on the panel, and each year we've been saying the same stuff about the industrial market in Westchester, the industrial market in the Bronx, tight market, upward pressure on pricing. but old product, old product. What's new this year in industrial for Westchester specifically is that, and we've seen it in spades, downtime remains the same, but historically the e-commerce tenants weren't taking a hard look at Westchester because they said their product is terrible. We want the high ceilings, we want multiple loading doors, we want, all these things that these buildings, these old buildings don't have. And now they're saying, we'll take a gamble on Westchester just because we need to be so, proximate to the Westchester people, just for this last mile delivery. So I know we talked about that last year, but now we're really seeing it. And they're saying, we'll make this work. We'll take out the mezzanine level. We'll do this to the building. We'll do this to the building. And they're really, we are seeing that that industry, e-commerce specifically, take space in Westchester County. So that's good news for the market. And it's just
is it
pushing
pushing
upward even
rents
more.
up?
That's true.
What are we looking at a vacancy rate and our rental rates moving up?
Yeah, the vacancy rates haven't changed much year over year. I mean, they're still in the 6 to 7%. If you look at it kind of countywide, it's a little different submarket to submarket. The range is kind of 6 to 9%, I would say. But the pricing is, we're starting to see low 20s. And I think what's interesting looking ahead is Bill talked a lot last year about adaptive reuse. I think, we may start to see some adaptive reuse from, these obsolete office buildings into industrial, which is crazy. It's crazy. I mean, who ever thought we would be talking about that? So I think that's something that's new and interesting for Westchester County.
Really fascinating, Sarah. The industrial story for Westchester and actually the whole region is a phenomenal story because it's changed so dramatically over the last few years. And in terms of the repurposing, accessing new sites is so difficult that there is momentum about harvesting other product type. On Midland Avenue in Portchester, for instance, there's a grocer being repurposed for distribution last mile. And that type of pressure, because of the economic performance of that sector, will cannibalize retail first, likely, but ultimately, you're right, could impact other sectors also.
Two months ago in November of last year, I was called actually by a giant, national landlord that owned a giant center in the Bronx, a big box center, that wanted to pick my brain specifically about the Bronx industrial market. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that they're considering converting that big box retail center into, a last mile center. So it's interesting.
Well, in the Bronx, we do have an increase in the amount of industrial from 5.9% in 2019 to 7.5% in 2020. And our rents are going from 1662 up to 1928 to $22 a square foot for an industrial building. There's a lot of demand for it in the Bronx, obviously. I'm new to this because we just joined, BMAR just joined, so I'm not really comfortable or familiar with how you do this. So give me a chance and I'll get in the swim as soon as I understand how. As soon as I know how you all operate, I'll get to know it better.
You gotta just jump right in, KZ.
Sarah and I work a lot together because I do a lot of joint ventures with Sarah because I'm a small firm, so I like to use her people. We do very well together. The retail market in the Bronx.
We'll get to retail in a little bit.
Okay.
I'd like to
I didn't know how to do
stick
this.
with industrial. I'd like to hear from Paul and Tom on industrial. Patty, I don't think you're in that sandbox at all,
I
are you?
actually am in that sandbox, but go right ahead.
Go ahead, Maggie. Go ahead. I'll jump in after you. Go ahead.
So basically, what we're seeing is, we're working with different type of users now. I have an industrial farmer, and when I first got that requirement, I was like, "What the heck do these guys do?" And
Cannabis?
as I'm learning, it's just it's going to be so much of what we see in the future. So there's been a lot of pivoting, and people are recreating. We just did a 35,000 square foot renewal with an industrial group in Rockland. And we started the search right at the height of COVID. And as much as we couldn't get them in the buildings, they were insisting. So we all like masked up and went out. What we're seeing in Westchester, you know, the supply and demand is not, the demand is there, the supply is narrow. So companies look more into Fairfield County where the rents are a little bit lower. But hopefully, as Bill alluded to, you know, maybe some of those buildings that we have could be readapted to industrial to keep the business in our county.
All right. John, I think I can take a little different approach here. My part-time job at night is I'm the chairman of the planning board of the town of Southeast. And I have a unique situation here because I get the real estate market, so it's interesting. But what I'm seeing is a lot of people are dusting off old plans to come back in. We're about to approve 1 million square feet in Bruce in Southeast. We just approved 90,000 square feet. And I just saw the East Fishkill Town Board approved Amazon 600,000 square feet. But I think there's an opportunity now during this COVID situation to really talk to the towns about revisiting the zoning to kind of adjust in a new market, which needs to be done on a regular basis. You know, our town is in the middle of rezoning our Route 22 corridor, but it took 15 years to kind of figure out maybe we should revisit some of these properties that aren't working and aren't selling. So I think the conversation is now with the elected officials to kind of revisit some of these properties that have been sitting dormant and some of these old buildings that haven't traded in a long time, to have a conversation to revisit the new market. Because I don't believe this e-commerce is going away. I think it's even going to get stronger. So it's time to get professionals like us to be talking to the decision makers in town to start thinking about what the new world looks like and how do we adapt to it and get the rateables. We're going to get crushed in the next couple of years if we don't get ahead of the curve. So I think from a planning standpoint and a brokerage standpoint, that's the avenue we got to kind of focus on if we can.
I couldn't agree with Tom more. We've been talking about this at these panels year after year, that the zoning needs to become dynamic and it needs to reflect what are the actual needs. I think we're seeing certainly in Orange and Rockland County, we're seeing buildings, those that are being built and those that are being retrofitted, being done in a very smart, sustainable way. But moreover, we're seeing a lot of those folks that deal with last mile, whether it's someone who's servicing the fleets, whether it's someone who's doing the installation of the racking and everything else that goes into these facilities. We're seeing a lot of connective tissue, and it is strengthening the market. I think people need to understand that there are, again, it comes down to geography and the kind of infrastructure that you have available. I think one of the challenges, for example, that Orange County has is that it has a very bad lacking water wheel and a sewer system. And so it is very hard for some of the big nationals to continue to grow at the rates that they're going without the infrastructure to service these big facilities. And, Tom, I know you've heard this term a lot, but one of the best incentives that the people who do the entitlements, the planning and zoning, is to create shovel-ready and seeker-ready sites so that you don't necessarily have to rely on the tax incentives, which are, it's a two-edged sword. The folks start to resent to having to give, for example, Amazon a great big pilot agreement. And then on the other hand, if they don't, Amazon says it might go somewhere else. And one of the reasons, using Amazon or Medline or take any one of them big nationals that are coming in to do this, one of the reasons they want these incentives is it takes so long to entitle these projects. And if you were able to have some shovel-ready things, you might be able to do that kind of trade-off. But it is a real big thing. It's not just big boxes. It's connective tissue, John, that connects into those big boxes. There's a lot of servicing of the big box and the last mile.
So Tom and Paul, you touched on something when you talked about rateables. Coming out of the last Great Recession, 2008, 2009, beginning in about 2010, from my perspective as a broker, I saw a lot of towns, not the big cities of Yonkers and White Plains, they were already embracing development. But I saw some of the smaller cities and towns start to embrace development to build back their ratables, to get more properties on there. And, you know, due to COVID, government at all levels, the federal, state, county, and municipal, they're stressed. They need more money coming in. Is the feeling among the panel that we will see an increase in development, more density, more height on potential development sites moving forward?
Can I speak for the Bronx for a second? Because
Sure.
that's a very important question. Right now, we were very successful in getting Jerome Avenue rezoned. There was a lot of rezoning going on, and a lot of my clients who are affordable housing developers took opportunity like that. And then we had the retail as part of that. The consensus under the new council, and I don't know who the next mayor is going to be, so that's going to be a very important question we're going to ask them when we interview them. But the Gowanus rezoning has been stopped because the community is now up in arms about all this redevelopment and repurposing of these buildings and the fact that they're going to gentrify and push them out. And Salamanca, who's chair of the land use committee in the city of New York, signed on to this bill. So I don't understand why they would be doing that. And we're going to start talking to them and asking them what's the objection, because the community always opposes the rezoning. I mean, it's just naturally happens. We deal with it all the time. We go in and we make agreements, like on La Centrale, we agreed to give them a restaurant on the corner. They wanted a sit-down restaurant. And it was very difficult to give them a sit-down restaurant, but we had to do it because it's part of our community reinvestment act that we signed. We have to sign a document. And so I think that the repositioning or rezoning is going to be a very big issue, both in I don't know Westchester as well, but I know Mount Vernon and those places. And I know in the city, it's going to be a big issue because we're trying to figure out how to create more housing and more opportunity.
John, I think that the big question mark moving forward, and I know everybody here would agree, is that we had a tremendous momentum moving forward with the TODs and along the railroad lines. And I think all the towns were on board doing that. Now we've been reset a little bit. Are the kids going to go back into the city is coming back? I think it is. It's not a matter of if, it's when. But we had tremendous momentum with the towns buying into the TOD issues all up and down the line. So I think it's just a matter of time before that comes back. But that was a driver in a great way for the last 2 years, the local towns working with developers with the TODs. So Sarah or Bill, I think you agree with that?
I agree, but I think and I'd love for Bill to weigh in as well, but I think what's interesting is the shift away from density, right? So I think, people that are moving out of New York City right now to Westchester, they're not looking to rent an apartment building for the most part. They're looking to be in a single family house with a yard. So, I mean, just, by way of example, one of the brokers in our office who John works with, Allison Luisi, had a site on the market 4 years ago, a single family development site in Fairfield County. They couldn't give it away. She was at a different firm at the time. This time around, she sold it in 90 days. So it was in Norwalk, and it's single family development. I mean, we're seeing such tremendous demand for single family development sites in Westchester and Fairfield, even I think in Putnam to a certain extent. So that's kind of been the news story. So I don't know how long it takes to get back to that space where everyone wants to be on top of each other. So, I think that's what I'm curious to see what happens.
Fair point. That's a very fair point. I can say from Houlihan Lawrence standpoint, the high market end was dead for the last couple of years. Very high inventory for the $1 million homes. Very little inventory now, to your point, Sarah, that people are looking to escape for that. But listen, I'm an optimist. I'm hoping that in a couple of years they get tired of the big houses again and want to be get back to the city when it comes live. But to your point, single family market is very hot right now, and I'm seeing as a planning board guy all these subdivisions that were going nowhere on a shelf back looking to get reapproved.
I think back to John's question. I think it's very important that we start to, obviously New York is a home rule state, and That means each locality has control over its zoning and planning. It's a very important police power that the municipalities have, whether it's a village, a town, you know, and obviously in the Bronx, it's a sort of county, but it's the, you know, the borough,
city.
but, and then of course the city. But, you know, Bill and I serve on the board at the Westchester County Association and are also involved in, you know, Business Council and the Rockland Business Association, Orange County Partnership, all of those organizations, Hudson Valley Economic Development Corporation, all of those organizations are getting it. And Bill, I'd like you to speak to the fact that we have those studies that come out from the Pace Land Institute that are talking about the fact that we need to look at this in a regional way, not giving up these home rule privileges that people have, but we need to take a look at the kind of infrastructure, the road systems, the sewer systems, the water systems, and you can speak to that because you chair that real estate committee, but these organizations are very important for our industry to be part of.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. The home rule requirement where municipalities have the authority for zoning and site plan approval is a constitutional right. It's in the state charter. So there are things that we can and can't do as it relates to encouraging these kind of developments that has to respect home rule. In addition, Westchester and the Hudson Valley, actually the balance of the state, is required to conform to SECRA, where Manhattan and the outer boroughs do not. So there's an additional encumbrance in getting projects advanced. And Paul, you mentioned the Pace Land Use Law Center has developed a playbook with the Westchester County Association. Tom, this is probably right out of what you do every day.
Mm-hmm.
It lays out the technical requirements to put in place zoning that is smart growth and drives economic development, because it's a very technical step, and we happen to think that the entire brokerage community, from residential through commercial and the whole spectrum in between, should be familiar with that in terms of the rules of the road there. Because if we're going to be promoting more development, particularly transit-oriented development, multifamily development, things that drive population growth and allows us to attract skilled labor, we've got to fix the disconnect between the general public and what are active, legitimate drivers of our economy. And it revolves around this development and entitlement.
I'm on the board of BOEDC. I'm the vice chair, and Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation has always taken lead in trying to work with the local communities and the community boards who have a lot to say about what happens in each of the community districts, but they're only advisory. At the end of the day, it's really the land use committee, the city council, that makes the final decision. We have been spearheading redevelopment and some rezonings proposals. What happened in Gowanus could have happened here at Jerome, but it didn't. We're looking at other areas, and the train station situation. We're getting new Metro North train stations in the Bronx, one in Co-op City, one right by the Hutch Metro Center. And my office is in the Hutch Metro Center, and I do go to the office every day. And it's very busy there. And Simone's going to build another 1 million square feet of office space and another hotel. And it's his feeling, and Metro Center is full. It's his feeling that people are not going to want to go back to Manhattan, and that they're going to be some offices there and people working from home, a combination of. So, and there's a building in the South Bronx, an industrial building on 145th Street, that they are converting into shared workspace. And there seems to be a lot more interest in that as well.
Let's pivot on two comments.
Old industrial buildings that are multi-floor, that can't be used for distribution centers.
Let's pivot on two comments you made, Kathy. You said that Simone is going to build another office building of large scale. And you also commented on another item, which we'll get to. It was the prevailing thought among a lot of people that when everybody stopped working in New York City, that the office market was just going to go ablaze in Westchester and Fairfield. My question to the people who work in the office market, did that happen?
I didn't see it, John. I saw the market kind of, in my opinion, what happened was that there was an initial rush out of the city, and they were rushing to safe buildings. I saw the Class A buildings being gobbled up in terms of office space, and the better buildings in the market for safety reasons. But those leases that were signed based on the body of work we did were short-term leases, just to get a sense of the market up here. So, I mean, Sarah could speak to that better than I can, but I didn't see that mass rush out here. We didn't see the big tenants coming. We saw little deals going on and just kind of, you know, weathering the storm type of deals. But that's my take on what we saw.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Bill's take, but we didn't see that much of that, but we're only kind of ramping up our office agencies, I would say. I mean, when we did speak with RPW group, they said they did land a number of, like, you know, moved their headquarters from Manhattan to 800 Westchester. And they did do a few deals coming out of New York City, which I think is positive, but I don't think it was nearly as much as people had anticipated. And I think at this point, with where we are in the pandemic, if it hasn't happened yet, it's probably not going to happen. I think eventually people are going to go back to New York City. You know, but I do agree that it's a great time to be an office broker because, you know, we kind of are wrapping up our office division with the hiring of Chris O'Callaghan at the end of last year. And some people sort of scratch their heads, like kind of a weird time to be starting an office division. But honestly, when I was a transactional office broker, two of my best years in the business were 2009 and 2010, immediately following 2008, because people needed us so much. They needed our advice. You know, it was a lot of blend and extends, but it was also that, you know, there was volume. There were a lot of transactions. So I think, you know, more than ever, office tenants are going to be saying, you know, what are you doing? You know, how can you save me money? How can I optimize my footprint? So it's a good time to be in the office space in some respects. Bill, what do you think?
Eddie, anything to add?
Well, you know, one of the interesting things about the office sector is we never have to worry about supply. But John, you asked a good question on the New York City activity. We saw a lot of transactions in the 2,000 to 10,000 square foot range, moving from New York City to the Fairfield County high-end Sound Shore communities, Greenwich and Westport, largely to existing pre-built space. There's some speculation that if the office pressure continues in Greenwich, that could approach a single-digit vacancy rate. Those relocations are largely from smaller boutique financial firms that have the wherewithal for that type of flexibility. The larger corporate, called institutional grade moves of 100,000 square feet or more, we have not seen. There have been some exploratory surveys that have taken place, but in terms of activity, we haven't seen it yet. And Sarah, we're all speculating where that may resolve itself because we just don't know. We're in a bit of free fall. But there is a lot of very critical thought going on out of some major New York City companies about a hub and spoke model. No one wants to be a first mover and make a mistake. And if you want to handicap it, I think this will be more transparent in the third quarter of this year. You know, as we've talked about a return to work and vaccines, et cetera, and herd immunity. At that point, there'd be an expectation of people returning to their office in New York City. And whether they want to or are willing to or are not prepared to, that's when the rubber's going to meet the road. And we'll start to see where that relocation drive to the suburban market actually be in the office sector.
Yeah, I think it's also industry specific, right? Like I think, you know, the fire, financial, insurance, real estate. I think all of us sort of like what I would call old school people, we want to return to the office. We want to be in the office. And I think there's going to be a push from these financial services companies. But my husband's in ad tech, and his company, which is a few thousand people, and all of his contemporaries, they're not returning to the office 5 days a week ever again. I think if he goes back 2 days a week, it's a stretch. And I'm not saying that's great for their company's productivity, but he calls me a dinosaur. So, but they're constantly on Teams, and they're constantly, and what's the Slack, and they feel like they can communicate effectively in that manner, not in person. I disagree, but.
One of
So
my
how does that
daughters, one of my
on
daughters
state-
is controller for Rupert Murdoch for News Corp. And she lives in Scarsdale, and she has been working from the house since March. And I asked her, when are you going back? She said, we're not sure yet. And she said, maybe towards the end of this year. Now, that's a very long time to be, but she works and she's got her, all her equipment there, and she seems to be fine.
So how does that reflect on space requirements going forward? So 18 months from now, you're currently in 25,000 square feet, and your employees, were packed in. With COVID, when your renewal comes up, are you looking at keeping the same amount of space, or are you downsizing because less people are going to be in the office? Or even though you have less people, are less employees going to demand more space, less shared space, no more open work environments? What is going to happen moving forward?
John, that's a great question. And some of the leading architects and space planners, the whole office ergonomic folks have been studying this. And who knows, because the corporations have to ultimately make the decision as the principals. But what they're suggesting is that, as it was noted, work from home, that the utilization of the office could go down by 40%. So it's 60% utilization. But given spacing and common space utilization, more meeting room, that the actual space requirement would grow at 25%. So the suggestion today is that if everyone reprogrammed into that model today, there'd be a 25% reduction in space need. So ultimately, the direction is going to be less space. It's going to be a function of how much.
Right.
Do you think they're going to require that office space and office way you lay it out be more spread out even after we've got this herd immunity?
I think the question
That's the
more
question. I don't know.
is from, do people now moving forward, if people are only going to be in the office 3 or 4 days a week, do you need a 1-to-1 ratio? Do you need one office for every one person? And I think we were on the phone with a large company yesterday that was exactly what they were grappling with. They knew they were going to need more, room for each person, a larger circulation factor potentially. But they also were unclear, are they going to do hoteling? Are they going to do, are people going to be sharing offices because not everyone's coming in every day?
I think the other thing that people are thinking about, and Bill, I know that this has come up with a lot of the planners that are looking at this, is that we may, in fact, God willing, achieve herd immunity with the vaccine and do all that. But we are just, so this year was COVID-19, and next year can be COVID-21. And I think we have to be concerned that we've seen how quickly a pandemic can sweep around the world, and how unprepared the world was, and particularly how unprepared the United States was in terms of dealing with these kinds of global pandemics and health emergencies. So I think there is something in the back of everybody's mind that there's a little bit of insurance in terms of how they're going to plan for social distancing and other things that I think some of those things are not going to leave our lexicon. I think they're going to be very much a part of what we continue to do, maybe in a modified sense. We still take, there was one guy who had a shoe bomb, and for 20 years now, we're still taking off our shoes at the airport. And so that there are certain things that stay with people, and I think we need to understand that. And screening and security and all of these things are going to be just like they were are now part of what we plan for. I think we have to plan for healthier buildings and healthier work environments.
Very good. Let's just touch on retail for a moment. What is the state of retail now? Are there any retailers actually opening locations? If so, what areas are they in? What's their specialty?
Do you want to talk about the Bronx for a second, and then you can talk about Westchester? The Bronx right now, I have to say, we have a lot of interest, but it's coming from the smaller users, the nail salons, the hair salons, the discount stores, there are thousands, the supermarkets, and the not-for-profits. The not-for-profits, the problem is that they want to build out. I've got 4 not-for-profits right now looking for space, and I've got them in 2 buildings right now, and they want a build out. They want the landlord to do the build out, and the build out runs between 80 to 100 a foot. And the rents they want to pay, because they believe that, this is a pandemic, they're not at the 45 to 50 a foot or 60 a foot, they're at the 35 a foot. So the numbers don't work. The landlord's out a lot of money, and that's the tenant that's out
3
there.
years free rent, basically.
Right. I got a phone call this morning. I was working on a universal pre-K, 23,000 square feet of 4183 3rd Avenue, which is right off Tremont. And it was right after the pandemic, right at the beginning of the pandemic. We had the LOIs were done. We were ready to move forward. And I got a call saying the school construction authority has put a stop on every one of these deals. This morning, I got a phone call. So I had this premonition yesterday, and I called John Peters. And I said, the budget's we're going to get money from the president. Find out if the SCA is going to reopen this. He called me this morning, jumping up and down, saying, I can't believe this, but they said, yes, move forward on that deal. So I think that some of these things are going to start to open up. And the SCA is a very important player, because the school construction authority pays the top rent and they do their own build out. So they're
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead,
we're
Jen.
seeing a lot of restaurant activity coming out of the city. We
yes.
just finished a 10-year deal with the restaurant group. It's out for signature. We have another one that's for 15 years. They're seeing real value as the residents are moving out of the city. They're following their customer. And, the rents are a giveaway up here. And some of these folks are not afraid to invest in the build out, but the landlords are a lot more flexible now as to what they're going to give. And as far as the other one, there's a tremendous amount of pop-ups going in. Tenants from the city are coming up, brand names. They want to test the market, and it gives the landlords an opportunity to get cash flow. And they take options, and if it works, it works.
Yeah, I think retail demand has certainly been turned 100% on its head from January of last year. Last year we were talking entirely about demand from experiential tenants, which is obviously completely dried up during the pandemic. But we are seeing, like grocer anchored centers are performing really well. Second generation restaurant space is certainly, doing very well. I know Kathy's seeing that in the Bronx as well. And to Patty's point about restaurant demand, I mean, that to me is like, the entrepreneurial spirit of Americans. We're in a pandemic, but people are still looking to open restaurants and take advantage of advantageous pricing. So that's all good. And supermarkets in general, DeChico's, I think, is such a success story for Westchester County. They opened another location last year. They're going to be announcing a new one, which we were involved with first this year. So, I mean, that's a great success story.
And John, in Orange and Rockland County, while there is some downtown shopping, that had already taken a big hit over the years in general, and so the downtown shopping is in most of the villages is swelled up with a lot of restaurants and a couple of clothing stores that go in and out here and there. Mostly in Rockland and Orange, you're dealing with the power strips and the major malls. So the super regional shopping centers that are there. And so there is optimism because you're starting to see Pyramid realign, for example, its space. So in Rockland County, Pyramid had built, for example, 250,000 additional square feet that it never was permitted for. And so that sort of area had been blocked off for the last 20 years. The town had a referendum. The referendum passed, allowing these folks to open up the 250,000 square feet of space. And they're looking at that, with a whole host of uses from hotel to you name it. So sort of changing the dynamic of that mall and what that will be. And I think, the experiential will probably make a return. I think it was Cuddy who made the prediction about experiential being the thing in 2020, but the experiential is going to make a return. And I think you're also going to see maybe as we go further out in Orange and some of the other places, Putnam Dutchess, you're going to see some of those big box spaces in the mall being some modified last mile distribution, the combination of stuff. So.
Yeah, can I say something? Can I just say something about retail? We've all been home. We're all used to ordering online. And, that has really crushed the retail, especially the mom and pops. Everyone's afraid to go to a store because of COVID. And you can see in your own communities, you'll find a little friendly sign on the door that says, due to an employee having COVID, we'll be open next week. And that just, creates more of a demand online. I mean, we probably will see a lot of the big box retailers disappear.
Sure.
Well, we don't have that many big box retailers in the Bronx. So ours are mostly mom and pops. And I have to say that streets like Fordham Road, 149th Street, 3rd Avenue, because a lot of these people do not have computers or can't do online shopping, there's a lot of activity on the street. I mean, there's a lot of activity, and my Dunkin' franchisee is looking for a drive-through spot on Fordham Road somewhere. I have to find. I found something at the end, but it's a little different than Westchester. With people in Westchester all do online. I do online, but here in the neighborhoods, there isn't that much. There was a lot of activity on certain streets.
John, I'll just wrap things up. I think there's a tremendous value play coming our way. Our retail and hospitality group are very busy. As they mentioned earlier, the restaurants, tremendous value of opportunity there, because a lot of the old restaurants have walked away from stuff. There's value there in the equipment, pennies on the dollar. So there's going to be a new wave of restaurateurs coming, and we're seeing that. And I think the retailers, as Sarah said earlier, the stronger power plazas are doing well. I was out yesterday looking at a couple of spaces that was $35 a foot last year. I can get it now for 22. So I think there's a tremendous value coming our way, and it's a great time to be a broker. And another asset class that's going to be, we're getting a lot of calls on, is, believe it or not, hotels. They got banged up, and there's plays, and there's redevelopment on that issue too, in terms of turning them into residential. So it's a fabulous time to be a broker.
Okay, great news. I think we all feel bullish on the next year going forward. We all can't wait till the vaccine is in place. I'd like to thank everybody for being a member of the panel today. It's very informative. I appreciate your time and your knowledge. And we're being respectful of everyone's time, and we're off only at 3 minutes after 11. And I would add, Bill did recommend Zoom. I had never heard of Zoom at last year's meeting. He said, buy Zoom.
I should have been on that call. I should have been on that call. It may make recommendations this year. I'll listen very carefully.
Okay.
How about buy Peloton?
I think it might be a little late on that.
That's another one. That's another one.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Sarah,
Nice seeing everybody.
Sarah, talk to you in a little while.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.